viewers, an Air India flight from Delhi to Vancouver on March 19 had to return mid-journey after some kind of an error led to the wrong aircraft being deployed. The aircraft departed Delhi, and after flying for nearly 4 hours, the airline realized that it was not the approved plane for the route, and then it had to turn back to the national capital. Air India then issued a statement saying that the flight had to return midway due to operational issues. And in fact, they have given a statement as well. And let me now take you through what exactly happened. How the passengers who were supposed to go from Delhi to Vancouver in Canada actually returned to the national capital because of a wrong plane that Air India had used to take these particular passengers. So it was basically a Boeing 777-200LR that was used instead of Boeing 777-300ER that was supposed to be used. Only 777-300ER is cleared for Canada, but the plane that was carrying passengers for Vancouver in Canada was using a different plane that was not allowed in Canada. Suddenly, mid-air, the plane, in fact, had to take a U-turn and come back to the national capital. It was around Chinese airspace when, the pilot perhaps realized, must have gotten alert that it's a wrong plane. And that was roughly 4 hours into the flying, 4 hours after takeoff. And then it landed back in the national capital. And to discuss it as to how can something like this happen, I'm joined on the broadcast by Sanjay Lazar, who is an aviation expert and CEO. Avialas. We also have with us Dr. Sumit Suseelan, who is AAC member. Thank you very much for joining us here on Times Now. And Sanjay Lazar, let me start by asking you, have you heard of an incident of this kind ever in the aviation sector in India or anywhere in the world?
Thank you for having me, Hina. To be quite honest, there's been one just last year by an American airline which flew a wrong type of aircraft into Italy and then had to divert and land. Instead of a 7878, they took a 7879. So it's not completely unheard of. There have been airlines that have done this. But this is a joke. It's absolutely ridiculous. And I do hope Air India gets to the bottom of it and finds who was responsible, because this is a serious error. Documentation was not filed correctly, and the aircraft took off. We've seen they must have lost at least 50 lakhs worth of fuel. Rough calculation, probably about 55 to 60 tons of jet fuel burned on 8 hours of flight, because obviously you've got to take the passengers all over again. The critical aspect here is, why is the 777-200LR banned in Canada? No. In fact, Vancouver is the base for a number of Air Canada's own 777-200LRs. They're slightly different from the Air India Delta leased version which was flying, and they operate out of Vancouver. In fact, today, if you notice, there is the same 777-200LR is landing into Toronto. So it's not that they're banned into that country. There is a requirement in law, and this is what most people probably did not realize, or somebody slipped up in the thing. There is a foreign air carrier operator rule under the certification manual of TP 11524, where the operator has to file in advance the name of the aircraft, the type of the aircraft, registration of the aircraft, right, the configuration. And only the 777-300 had been approved for Delhi to Vancouver. Right. Whereas in Delhi-Toronto, you have other types of aircraft also. So this was the crucial distinction here. Someone realized it 4 hours into the flight and turned it around. But, that's a huge hit for the company.
And it's a big blunder also, Dr. Suseelan, because, how can it happen? Can you explain to us, what, could have really gone wrong? What could have been the circumstances that led to something like this happening? And who would have really eventually realized that it's a wrong plane and we need to call the pilot back?
I think we did a show, a month back with Madhav, where the dispatch team was in question. Are we deporting a team who don't have experience on, allocating the aircrafts? So right now, this 300 ER, we are flying 300 ER to US and Canada from years, more than a decade. We can see the same aircraft are flying. Suddenly they change it and keeping it 200 LR aircraft. Definitely, there is a big question mark coming up now on the entire team. The team who are appointing pilots, even pilot was not aware. How can it possible? Definitely, it's a very irresponsible behavior which was done. Safety matter as well, and the passenger, we have to think from the point of view of passenger also. After 8-9 hours of flight, they are back to the same destination, to Delhi. So definitely it's a very big question mark, and definitely inquiry will be setting up for the same.
Okay. Sanjay Lazar, now that's an important point that Dr. Sushilan has made. Inexperienced team allocating aircraft. How is that possible? Because it's a very, very sensitive issue. Who is at fault here in your opinion? The airline? Operators? I mean, who is at fault here? Who could have, led to this kind of a goof up? Because DGCA has not said anything in this regard officially. Just one statement has come, and that too has come from Air India.
Well, Hina, you'll definitely hear from the DGCA, and Dr. Sushilan is here. He's already told you. I think you'll certainly hear from it, and I definitely blame their operations setup and their IOCC, maybe their engineering control, which allocates aircraft. So there is a large regulatory, failure here, because obviously people have to realize that certain documentation is filed for certain aircraft, and it's not like a auto rickshaw where you can just swap it around. If a country of origin is sending a type of aircraft, you can't just decide I'll send B type of aircraft, which may not be acceptable or which may not even be allowed into that country or into that city or that airport. So here I do think that they will need to look deep and hard and find out where the slip up took place. And obviously, I'd like to see somebody take responsibility and ownership of this. Of course, Air India has come out with a statement, and they've admitted that it was an operational issue and they had to bring the passengers back and put them in hotels.
Right.
But it's the tip of the iceberg. Like Dr. Sushilan says, they will look at it. And I do expect that, there will be some rumbling.
Okay. Of course, it's a very plain kind of a statement. Usually, the statements that we get from Air India that was some kind of operational issue. But then for the passengers, there's too much of inconvenience. And also for the airline, look at the amount of fuel that we're talking about. 8 hours, a Boeing aircraft, which burns a lot of fuel per hour. So at a time when there is a war going on, jet fuel prices are in any case going up. Air India was the first airline to, propose a fuel surcharge. This is like a big blow to the airline at a sensitive time like this. So definitely heads need to roll. We need to go to the bottom of this issue. But because, you have raised an important issue of the IOCC, let's also tell our viewers a little bit about that, because here on Times Now, we have raised this issue a couple of times in the past also. Viewers, the Integrated Operational Control Center, or IOCC, is the nerve center of all flight operations. It manages, monitors and coordinates all daily flight operations. So in a sense, it is the IOCC that controls all flight operations, every flight you take. But remember, the rules for appointment for this have been diluted. In fact, according to the new draft civil aviation requirement proposed by DGCA, it effectively dilutes requirements for running the IOCC, which is the nerve center of any commercial airline. The DGCA had removed the head of the IOCC in Air India for not complying with the rules last year. In short, the operation of the flight that you take might be controlled by someone who is brought in from these diluted rules. This clearly shows operational mess and the need for stricter air safety norms and tighter regulatory oversight in the aviation sector. And in the past, there have been some serious concerns over air safety in India, from the Ahmedabad air crash to Indigo mess. The spotlight on air safety rules is continuing. Remember, weeks ago, we showed you how DGCA has made a mockery of flight safety. Remember, in Air India, the IOCC chief was a qualified pilot. Of course, that status, they adhered to. Now, Air India Express chief, Air India Express, if you look at that particular airline, the IOCC chief is not a pilot or flight dispatcher. So this is not in compliance with the rules. If you look at Indigo, the IOCC chief is not a pilot or a flight dispatcher, removed by DGCA. In case of DGCA, IOCC chief, again, not pilot or flight dispatcher, again, not in compliance with the rules. If you look at Akasa Air, IOCC chief is qualified flight dispatcher and complying with the rules. And if you look at Star Air, the IOCC chief is again qualified flight dispatcher in compliance. Now, this is what we learned from the sources. Let's go back to our guests who continue to be with us. Dr. Sumit Suseelan, do you think now DGCA also needs to look at this issue from this perspective, from the perspective of the nerve center that we are talking about, the IOCC, and the rules perhaps that were diluted also need some kind of a rethink?
DGCA and the entire ministry is closely keeping the track for all this thing, and definitely right now I think this incident which happened, definitely the DGCA is keeping track for this thing, and I think shortly by Monday you can see the result what the ministry is coming up with the circular for the same.
Sanjay Lazar, any comments?
Yes, certainly. I do believe the DGCA needs to tighten up. The ministry needs to tighten up on all airlines. We also saw, during Indigo's mess, they replaced their IOCC chief. And I would go one step further, actually. In this instance, some 55, 60 odd tons of fuel has been wasted. There is a war going on, like you rightly said. ATF is at an all-time high. But this also looks forward, to aviation safety and security, and I do believe it's time that maybe the DGCA needs to start appointing one person in every IOCC, in every airline, just to monitor on rotation basis. Because if airlines themselves are going to slip up every now and then, the passenger needs to, and air safety needs to be kept the strictest of control, and I think it's very important. Very important. I would also not like to, I think Dr. Suseelan pointed out, it's not the pilot's fault here. He doesn't know what regulatory document has been filed. I want to clarify this, not that I'm taking up for any part, but there's an entire network of people behind the scenes who should have known this. The red flag should have
everything is checked from the nose to the tail. Everything is inspected, and I'm quite surprised at the fact that nobody, thought about it, that it's the wrong aircraft that the pilot is going to take to Canada. I mean, it's absolutely shocking what has happened. We'll still wait and see what DGCA, what the ministry has to say on this big goof up that has happened, that is now clearly making headlines. Thank you very much, both of you gentlemen. Appreciate you joining us here and sharing with us your perspective. Let's now move on, viewers, and we have another important